The night Gavin Cross told his wife she wasn't beautiful enough to be seen with him, he had no idea he was about to destroy himself. Standing in their pristine Manchester kitchen, credit card statement in hand like a weapon, he laughed at the woman who'd given him everything. He mocked her clothes, her face, the space she took up in the world. Then he delivered the final cut. He was taking his young assistant to the company gala instead. What Gavin didn't know was that humiliation has a breaking point, and on the other side of that break, a woman with nothing left to lose. If you want to see how this story unfolds, stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this journey travels. The smell of roasted chicken filled the Cross family kitchen, warm and ordinary, the kind of scent that belonged to 1,000 quiet Thursday evenings. Leah Cross stood at the counter, her hands moving through familiar motions, slicing vegetables, checking the oven timer, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. Upstairs, she could hear Ben and Mia's muffled laughter, probably building another elaborate fort out of couch cushions and bed sheets. She smiled at the sound, that reflexive mother's smile that came even when exhaustion lived in her bones. She was wearing jeans that had seen better days and a sweater she'd owned since before Mia was born. Soft gray, stretched out at the elbows, comfortable in the way that only truly worn-in clothes could be. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame her face. No makeup. She hadn't bothered with makeup for a regular Thursday in months. Years, maybe. When had that started? When had she stopped seeing the point? The front door opened with enough force to rattle the frame. Leah's hand stilled on the cutting board, knife hovering over a half-sliced tomato. She knew that particular quality of entrance, the one that said Gavin's day hadn't gone the way he wanted, and someone was going to pay for it. Leah, his voice carried through the house, sharp and demanding. She set down the knife carefully, wiped her hands on a dish towel, and turned toward the doorway just as Gavin Cross strode into the kitchen. He was still in his work clothes, expensive charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, tie loosened just enough to suggest a man who worked hard and played harder. At 42, he'd kept himself in good shape, or at least he paid people to keep him in good shape. Personal trainer 3 times a week, the right haircut, the right watch. Everything about Gavin was carefully curated to project success. Everything except his expression, which right now projected pure contempt. We need to talk about this. He slapped something down on the kitchen island, their credit card statement, the pages fanned out like evidence at a crime scene. Leah blinked at it, genuinely confused. About what? About your spending. Gavin's finger stabbed at a line item. 73 pounds at Marks & Spencer. What the hell did you buy? She stared at him, waiting for the punchline that didn't come. Gavin, that was groceries, and clothes for the kids. Mia needed new school shoes. 73 pounds, he repeated, as if the number itself was obscene. And here, 45 pounds at some salon. I got my hair trimmed. It had been 4 months. 4 months. He laughed, the sound cold and brittle. Well, clearly, it was money well spent. You look absolutely transformed. The sarcasm landed like a slap. Leah felt her face flush, heat creeping up her neck. I don't understand what you want me to say. Those are normal expenses, necessary expenses. What I want, Gavin said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that was somehow worse than shouting, is for you to show a little self-awareness, a little perspective. He picked up the statement, waving it like a flag of surrender she hadn't offered. Do you have any idea what I do to earn this money, the hours I put in, the stress I'm under? Of course I do. No, I don't think you do. He moved closer, and Leah found herself taking an unconscious step back against the counter. I think you sit here in this house all day, spending my money on God knows what, letting yourself go, and you don't give a single thought to what I'm dealing with. The pressure, the expectations. Letting yourself go. The words hung in the air between them, toxic and deliberate. I take care of our children, Leah said quietly, hating how small her voice sounded. I manage this entire household. I make sure your life runs smoothly. Please. Gavin cut her off with a dismissive wave. Don't act like you're running a corporation. You're home with 2 kids who are in school most of the day. My mother managed 4 children and worked part-time, and she never looked like... He trailed off, but his eyes finished the sentence as they traveled over her with obvious disdain, from her worn sweater to her makeup-free face to her comfortable, practical jeans. Like what? Leah heard herself ask, even though she didn't want to know the answer, even though she already knew. Like she'd given up. Gavin said it simply, matter-of-factly, the way someone might comment on the weather. You used to take pride in your appearance, Leah. You used to make an effort. Now you just exist. You shuffle around this house in whatever's comfortable, and you wonder why I don't want to. He stopped himself, shook his head. Never mind. Why you don't want to what? Something was building in Leah's chest, something that felt like anger but burned colder. Say it, Gavin. Finish the sentence. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the decision being made behind his eyes. The choice to go there, to cross a line that might not have a way back. Why I don't want to be seen with you anymore, he said. The kitchen seemed to contract around those words. Upstairs, Ben and Mia's laughter filtered down through the ceiling, oblivious and innocent. The oven timer beeped, signaling that dinner was ready. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked. Normal sounds in a moment that had just stopped being normal. You don't want to be seen with me, Leah repeated slowly, testing the words, trying to understand their shape. Look at yourself, Leah. Really look. Gavin gestured at her like she was a piece of evidence. You're a shadow of the woman I married. No style, no energy, no presence. You've let yourself become invisible. I'm raising our children. Other women manage to do that and still look like women, he shot back. Nina manages it just fine, and she has 3 kids. Nina, her best friend. The comparison was designed to cut, and it did. Nina, who always seemed to have perfect hair and perfect outfits and somehow made it all look effortless. Nina has a live-in nanny and a housekeeper, Leah said, her voice shaking now. Nina's husband doesn't criticize every penny she spends. Maybe Nina's husband has better things to look at. The cruelty was so casual it took Leah's breath away. She gripped the counter behind her, needing something solid to hold on to while her world tilted sideways. Gavin pulled out his phone, swiped through something, then held it up to her. This is the company gala, 2 weeks from Saturday. Black tie, all the senior partners and their wives, the whole dog and pony show. Leah looked at the invitation on his screen. Elegant script, prestigious venue, the kind of event where Gavin always shined. She'd been to a dozen of these over the years, back when she still felt like she belonged in that world. I remember, she said. I was going to look for a dress this weekend. Don't bother. The words were so flat, so final, that for a moment Leah didn't understand them. What? Gavin pocketed his phone and straightened his tie with deliberate precision. I'm taking Chloe instead. Chloe Reed, his 26-year-old assistant with the bright smile and the fitted skirts and the way of laughing at all of Gavin's jokes like they were the most clever things she'd ever heard. You're taking your assistant, Leah said numbly, to a gala for partners and their spouses. Chloe understands the importance of presentation. She knows how to represent the firm properly, how to make the right impression. Gavin's tone was that of someone explaining something obvious to someone slow. This is a professional event, Leah. I need someone who won't embarrass me. I'm your wife. Exactly. He picked up the credit card statement again, folded it precisely in half, which is why this needs to change. The spending, the attitude, the whole... He waved his hand vaguely in her direction. Situation, I'm not supporting a dependent who can't even be bothered to look the part. Leah felt something inside her chest crack, a fracture that ran deep and threatened to split her completely. Are you hearing yourself right now? Do you understand what you're saying to me? I'm saying what someone should have said months ago. Gavin tucked the statement into his jacket pocket. I'm saying that you've gotten comfortable and complacent, and I'm tired of it. I'm tired of coming home to this. Another dismissive gesture. I'm tired of having a wife who looks like she's already given up on life. I gave up my career for you, Leah said, her voice breaking. I gave up my design business, my clients, my independence, everything, so I could support your career, so I could raise our children while you worked 60-hour weeks and went to client dinners and golf weekends, and you think that earns you the right to stop trying? Gavin's eyes were cold, distant, looking at her like she was a stranger he'd found mildly disappointing. You think being a mother means you get to let everything else go? That's not how it works, Leah. That's not how any of this works. Then tell me how it works, Gavin. The anger was rising now, hot and sharp, cutting through the shock. Explain to me how I'm supposed to manage a household, raise 2 children, and maintain whatever impossible standard you've decided I'm failing to meet, all while you criticize every pound I spend and compare me to women who have resources I don't have. You have resources, he said quietly. You just choose to waste them feeling sorry for yourself instead of doing something about it. Leah opened her mouth, then closed it. What could she say to that? What argument could she possibly make against someone who had already decided she was the problem, who had already rewritten their history to make her the villain of her own diminishment? I'm taking Chloe to the gala, Gavin repeated, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. What you do with that information is up to you. You can either take it as a wake-up call and start making changes, or you can keep playing the victim. Either way, I'm done pretending things are fine when they're clearly not. He walked out of the kitchen without another word, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Leah heard him go into their bedroom, heard the closet door open and close, heard the sounds of him changing out of his work clothes into whatever he wore when he wanted to stop being Gavin Cross, partner at Cross and Caldwell Financial, and start being whoever he was becoming, someone who didn't want to be seen with his wife. Leah stood frozen at the counter, her hand still gripping the edge, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The oven timer was still beeping. She reached over mechanically and turned it off, pulled the chicken out, set it on the stovetop. Steam rose from the golden skin, and the smell that had been comforting 5 minutes ago now made her stomach turn. "Mom?" Mia's voice called from upstairs. "Is dinner ready?" "5 minutes, sweetheart," Leah called back, amazed at how normal her voice sounded, how completely it betrayed nothing of the earthquake that had just reshaped her internal landscape. She set the table, called the kids down, served food onto plates with steady hands. Ben and Mia chattered about their day, something about a science project, something about a boy who'd been mean at recess, and Leah made the appropriate responses, asked the appropriate questions, played the role of mother, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized long ago. Gavin didn't join them. She heard him on a phone call in his office, his voice smooth and professional, probably charming some client or colleague with the same warmth he'd once shown her, before she became invisible. After dinner, after baths and bedtime stories, and the careful ritual of tucking in 2 children who still believed their parents loved each other, Leah stood in her bedroom and looked at herself in the full-length mirror. Gray sweater, worn jeans, face bare of makeup, showing every year of her 38 spent living. Hair that needed more than a trim, needed color, needed attention she hadn't given it because there was always something more important. Some permission slip to sign, some skinned need a bandage, some crisis to manage. When had she stopped seeing herself as a person and started seeing herself as just a function? Just a role to fill? She pulled the ponytail holder out, let her hair fall around her shoulders. It was longer than she usually wore it, streaked with strands of gray she'd stopped bothering to cover. When was the last time she'd actually looked at herself? Really looked, the way someone else might look at her? The way Gavin looked at Chloe. Leah closed her eyes against the thought, but it was too late. She could picture it perfectly. Chloe in some elegant black dress, her young skin glowing, her bright laugh filling the spaces Leah used to occupy. Chloe on Gavin's arm, introducing herself to the senior partners, making small talk with their wives, being everything Leah apparently wasn't anymore. Visible, present, worth being seen with. The crack in her chest widened and suddenly Leah couldn't breathe. She stumbled to the bed and sat down hard, pressing her hands to her face as the first sob broke free. Then another. Then she was crying in great gasping waves, the kind of crying that came from somewhere so deep she didn't know she could reach it. How had she gotten here? How had she become the kind of woman her own husband was ashamed to be seen with? The answer whispered back at her in Gavin's voice. You let yourself go. You stopped trying. You chose this. Had she? Had she really chosen any of this? She thought about the years after Ben was born, when Gavin's career had started taking off and he needed her to be available, flexible, always ready to adjust her schedule around his. She thought about closing her interior design business, telling her clients she was taking a hiatus that somehow became permanent. She thought about the sleepless nights, the endless demands, the slow erosion of everything that had made her feel like herself. And Gavin, what had Gavin sacrificed? He'd kept his career, his autonomy, his identity. He'd kept everything while she'd slowly disappeared into the role of wife and mother until there was nothing left that was just hers. No wonder he couldn't see her anymore. She'd become invisible even to herself. The bedroom door opened. Gavin came in, already in his pajamas, barely glancing at her as he headed for the bathroom. "You're still up." Leah wiped at her face, trying to pull herself together. "We need to talk about this." "We did talk about it." He squeezed toothpaste onto his brush with precise efficiency. "I told you how I feel. What you do with that is your choice. You can't just replace me at a company event, Gavin. These are people who know me. Partners I've had dinner with, wives I've had coffee with 2 years ago." He started brushing, his words muffled but still cutting. "When was the last time you actually engaged with any of them, Leah? When was the last time you even tried to be part of that world?" "I've been raising our children." "Oh, for God's sake!" He spit into the sink with unnecessary force. "Stop hiding behind the kids. Plenty of mothers manage to maintain their identities. You chose to use motherhood as an excuse to check out of everything else." "I didn't check out. You pushed me out." The words erupted before she could stop them. "Every time I tried to keep my business going, you had some emergency. Some client dinner I had to attend, some weekend trip that meant I had to cancel on my own clients. You wanted a wife who could drop everything for you, and that's what I became." Gavin turned to face her, his expression maddeningly calm. "Is that really how you remember it? Because I remember asking you to come to important events, and you acting like it was some huge imposition. I remember you complaining about getting dressed up, about making small talk, about all the things that come with being married to someone successful. I never complained. You didn't have to say it out loud." He dried his face with a towel, precise and methodical. "It was written all over you, the resentment, the martyr complex. Like you were doing me some huge favor by showing up to support my career." Was that true? Had she resented it? She tried to remember those early events, the gallery openings and partner dinners and cocktail parties where she'd smiled until her face hurt and made conversation with people who only cared about her as an extension of Gavin's success. Maybe she had resented it, just a little. Maybe it had shown more than she realized. "I'm sorry if I didn't perform enthusiastically enough for you," Leah said, her voice tight. "I'm sorry I was more focused on keeping our actual life running instead of playing the perfect corporate wife." "See, that right there," Gavin pointed at her like he'd just proven a point. "That attitude. That's exactly what I'm talking about. You act like everything you do is some noble sacrifice, and everything I ask for is unreasonable. You asked me to give up my career. I asked you to prioritize our family." He hung the towel with careful precision. "There's a difference. And what did you prioritize, Gavin? What did you give up?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes was worse than anger or frustration. It was indifference. Complete, absolute indifference. "I don't have time for this circular conversation," he said. "I have an early meeting tomorrow. I'm sleeping in the guest room." He walked out without waiting for a response, and Leah was left alone in their bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life. Wedding photo on the dresser. She looked so young, so hopeful, so impossibly naive about what marriage would cost her. Family photos on the wall, holidays and birthdays, and ordinary moments that had seemed happy at the time, but now felt like lies she'd told herself. She lay back on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere in this house, her husband was falling asleep without a second thought about the bomb he'd just dropped into their marriage. Somewhere down the hall, her children were dreaming innocent dreams, untouched by the knowledge that their family was fracturing. And here she was, 38 years old and invisible, trying to figure out when she'd stopped being a person and started being a problem that needed solving. The worst part was that she almost believed him, almost believed that this was her fault, her failure, her choice. Almost believed that if she could just try harder, look better, be more, she could fix this. Almost. But somewhere in the wreckage of her self-esteem, buried under years of compromise and diminishment, a small voice whispered, "What if he's wrong? What if this wasn't about her letting herself go, but about Gavin letting her go?" Slowly, methodically, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but his reflection of who he thought she should be. What if she wasn't the problem at all? The thought was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Because if Gavin was wrong, if this wasn't her failure but his cruelty, then she had a choice to make. She could keep trying to become whatever version of herself he'd decided was acceptable, or she could remember who she'd been before she'd started seeing herself through his eyes, before she'd become invisible. Leah pulled out her phone, her hands shaking slightly as she opened the messaging app. Nina's name was right at the top. They texted almost daily about everything and nothing, the kind of constant communication that came from 15 years of friendship. But this message was different. This message required her to say out loud the thing she'd been pretending wasn't happening. "Are you awake?" she typed. Then, before she could second-guess it, "I need to talk." The response came within seconds. "Always. Come over. I'll put the kettle on." Leah looked at the message, then at the dark hallway where Gavin was sleeping peacefully in the guest room, undisturbed by what he'd done. She thought about staying here, in this bed, in this house, in this life that was slowly suffocating her. Then she got up, grabbed her car keys, and walked out into the night. Nina Hart's house was 10 minutes away, a sprawling modern build in one of Manchester's better neighborhoods. Lights were already on when Leah pulled into the driveway, and Nina was at the door before Leah had even turned off the engine, tall and elegant, even in pajamas, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, concern etched across her face. "Jesus, Leah." Nina pulled her into a hug the moment she was close enough. "What happened?" And just like that, Leah broke again. All the tears she'd thought she'd cried out came back with reinforcements, and she sobbed into Nina's shoulder, while her best friend held her and murmured soothing nonsense and guided her inside to the warm, bright kitchen that smelled like chamomile tea and safety. "Talk to me," Nina said once Leah was settled at the kitchen island with a steaming mug. "What did that bastard do now?" "He's taking Chloe to the gala." The words came out flat, exhausted. "His assistant, he said, he said he doesn't want to be seen with me anymore." Nina's expression went through several rapid transformations, shock, rage, disbelief, before settling on a cold fury that would have been frightening if it wasn't so clearly on Leah's behalf. "He said what?" "He said I let myself go, that I'm invisible, that I'm a shadow of who I used to be." Leah wrapped her hands around the mug, needing its warmth. "And the worst part is, Nina, when I look in the mirror, I think he might be right." "Stop." Nina's voice cut through the self-pity like a knife. "Stop right there. Don't you dare let that man make you believe his cruelty is truth. But look at me. I am looking at you. I'm looking at my best friend who has spent 8 years putting everyone else first, who gave up her career to support her husband's ambition, who raises 2 incredible kids and manages a household and still finds time to help other people whenever they need it." Nina leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "You didn't let yourself go, Leah. You let yourself be taken for granted. There's a difference." "He compared me to you," Leah admitted quietly. "Said you managed to take care of yourself while raising kids." "Oh, that absolute—" Nina bit off what was probably a truly creative curse. "Leah, I have a nanny. I have a housekeeper. I have a husband who actually contributes to the running of our household and doesn't act like parenting his own children is doing me a favor. Don't let Gavin gaslight you with false equivalencies." Leah sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her. When did I become this person? When did I stop seeing myself as anything other than Ben and Mia's mom or Gavin's wife? When you were told, over and over in 1,000 subtle ways, that those roles were all that mattered. Nina reached across the island and squeezed Leah's hand. "But here's the thing, love. You're still in there. The woman who built a design business from nothing, who had clients begging for your vision, who could transform a space and make people feel something, she's still there. She's just been buried under years of being told she doesn't matter. I don't know if I can get her back." "Of course you can." Nina's certainty was absolute. "And more importantly, you should. Not for Gavin, screw Gavin, but for yourself, for Ben and Mia, so they don't grow up thinking this is what love looks like." That hit harder than anything else. The thought of Mia learning that this was normal, that a man belittling his wife was just how marriage worked. The thought of Ben growing up to treat his own partner the way Gavin treated her. "What do I do?" Leah asked, her voice small and lost. Nina smiled, and there was something sharp in it, something that looked a lot like rebellion. You stop shrinking. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop letting Gavin Cross define your worth. That sounds good in theory, but nothing. Nina pulled out her phone, started scrolling with purpose. You want practical steps? Here's where we start. Tomorrow, you're calling Marcus at that salon on Deansgate. Tell him Nina sent you, he'll fit you in. Then we're going shopping, and I don't want to hear one word about budgets or what Gavin thinks about spending. After that, we're signing you up at my gym, getting you back into design forums, reconnecting you with your old network. Nina, I'm not done. Nina looked up, her expression softening. And most importantly, you're going to start seeing yourself the way the rest of us see you. Smart, talented, beautiful, strong. Everything Gavin has been working very hard to make you forget you are. Leah felt something flutter in her chest, something that might have been hope, or might have been terror, or might have been the first stirring of anger that wasn't directed at herself. What if it's too late? What if I've been this person for so long that I can't remember how to be anyone else? Nina came around the island and pulled Leah to her feet, holding her by both shoulders and looking her straight in the eyes. Then we'll remember for you, until you can remember yourself. They stood there in Nina's bright kitchen, the tea cooling on the counter, the night spreading dark and quiet beyond the windows. And for the first time since Gavin had walked into their kitchen with that credit card statement and his casual cruelty, Leah felt something other than despair. She felt possibility. It was terrifying and fragile and barely there at all, but it was something, a tiny spark in the darkness that said, maybe, just maybe, she was more than what Gavin Cross said she was. Maybe she always had been. Okay, Leah whispered. Okay. What's first? Nina grinned, the expression fierce and full of purpose. First, we finish this tea. Then we make a list. And then, my dear friend, we start planning how to show Gavin Cross exactly what he's losing. I thought you said this wasn't about him. It's not. Nina's smile turned wicked. But that doesn't mean we can't enjoy watching him realize what a colossal mistake he's made. And despite everything, despite the pain and the humiliation and the crushing weight of the evening, Leah found herself smiling back. Small at first, then wider, until she was almost laughing, the sound watery and broken, but real. Maybe that's where healing started. Not with a grand gesture or a dramatic transformation, but with a simple choice to stop believing the person who'd spent years teaching you to doubt yourself. Maybe it started with remembering that you were worth more than you'd been told. Maybe it started with a friend, a cup of tea, and the radical notion that you deserved better than being invisible. The morning light came too early, filtering through Nina's guest room curtains, and finding Leah curled on her side, awake but unmoving. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Gavin's voice telling her she wasn't worth being seen with, saw Chloe's bright smile and perfect posture, felt the weight of 8 years pressing down on her chest like a physical thing. But something was different now. Something had shifted in those dark hours between midnight and dawn. She was angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger that burned out quickly. This was something colder, more deliberate, settling into her bones like steel. Gavin had taken so much from her career, her confidence, her sense of self, and she'd let him do it because she'd believed that's what love required. Sacrifice, compromise, making yourself smaller so someone else could be bigger. Well, she was done being small. Nina knocked softly and pushed the door open, already dressed in elegant workout clothes that probably cost more than Leah's entire wardrobe. You're awake. Good. Marcus can see you at 10, which gives us just enough time for breakfast and a serious talk about what comes next. Leah sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. I need to go home first. Check on the kids. Already handled. Nina set a cup of coffee on the nightstand. I texted you from your phone about an hour ago, told Gavin you were here because you needed some space to think. He responded with fine and nothing else, so I'm guessing he's too busy feeling justified to actually care where you are. The casualness of it stung, but Leah wasn't surprised. Of course Gavin didn't care. He'd probably slept better without her there, relieved to not have to look at his disappointing wife. The kids? She asked. Ben and Mia are fine. Gavin's sister is picking them up from school today. Apparently she owed him a favor. Nina sat on the edge of the bed, her expression serious. Which means you have the whole day. No interruptions, no excuses, no backing out. Nina, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't what? Take care of yourself? Invest in your own well-being? Nina's voice was gentle but firm. Leah, when was the last time you did something just for you? Not for the kids, not for Gavin, not for the household, just for yourself. Leah opened her mouth to answer, then realized she couldn't. Months? A year? Longer than that? Exactly. Nina stood, pulling Leah up with her. So here's what's happening today. Hair at 10, then we're having lunch somewhere ridiculously overpriced where you won't worry about what it costs. After that, we're going shopping, and before you start protesting about Gavin and his credit card opinions, we're using my credit card because I decide what I spend my money on, and right now I'm deciding to spend it on my best friend. I can't let you. You can, and you will. Nina's tone left no room for argument. Consider it an investment in watching Gavin's face when he realizes what an absolute fool he's been. Despite everything, Leah felt her lips twitch toward a smile. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? Immensely. Nina's grin was wicked. I've been waiting years for you to stop making excuses for that man. Now come on, Marcus is an artist, but even artists have schedules to keep. 2 hours later, Leah sat in a sleek leather chair at Deansgate's most exclusive salon, watching in the mirror as Marcus circled her like a sculptor examining marble. He was tall and impossibly stylish, with silver hair swept back from his forehead, and the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. Nina says you need a transformation, he said, his fingers lifting sections of her hair, examining the texture and color with professional intensity. But I don't do transformations. I do revelations. Is there a difference? Leah asked, her voice uncertain. Absolutely. Marcus met her eyes in the mirror. Transformations are about becoming someone new. Revelations are about uncovering who you already are. So tell me, Leah, who are you? The question caught her off guard. Who was she? Wife? Mother? The woman Gavin didn't want to be seen with? Those were all labels that defined her in relation to other people. But underneath all that, stripped of every role she played, who was Leah Cross? I don't know anymore, she admitted quietly. Marcus smiled, kind and knowing. Then let's find out. What followed was 3 hours of careful attention unlike anything Leah had experienced in years. Marcus didn't just cut her hair. He listened while he worked, asking questions about her life before marriage, before children, before she'd learned to make herself small. He asked about her design work, her favorite projects, what had made her feel alive and creative and fully herself. And somehow, talking about those things while he worked, Leah started to remember. Not just the facts of who she'd been, but the feeling of it. The woman who'd had opinions about color theory and spatial dynamics, who'd argued passionately with contractors and won, who'd taken empty spaces and filled them with beauty and purpose. That woman was still in there somewhere. There, Marcus said finally, spinning her chair to face the mirror. That's who you are. Leah stared at her reflection and didn't recognize herself, except she did, in a way that made her chest tight with something between grief and hope. Marcus had cut away the dead ends and the weight, shaping her hair into soft layers that framed her face and brought out her cheekbones. The color was richer, warmer, covering the gray but keeping her natural tones. She looked polished but not overdone, elegant but not trying too hard. She looked like herself, like a version of herself she'd forgotten existed. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. Just promise me you won't let anyone make you forget her again. Nina was waiting when Leah emerged, and her best friend's face split into a triumphant grin. Oh, Gavin is going to lose his mind. This isn't about Gavin, Leah said, but she was smiling too, couldn't help it. For the first time in years, she felt visible. Not in the way Gavin meant, not as an accessory or a reflection of someone else's success, but as an actual person who mattered. You're right, it's not about him, Nina agreed, but it's still going to be deeply satisfying to watch. Now come on, we have an appointment at Harvey Nichols, and I have very specific ideas about what you're going to wear to that gala. Nina, I'm not going to the gala. Gavin made it very clear. Gavin doesn't get to make your decisions for you anymore. Nina linked her arm through Leah's and steered her toward the car. He can take whoever he wants to that event, but that doesn't mean you can't go too. It's a semi-public function at a hotel you've been to a dozen times. You have every right to be there. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I can't just show up uninvited. You're not uninvited. You're the wife of a partner. That's an automatic invitation, whether Gavin acknowledges it or not. Nina's expression turned calculating. Besides, I already called Judith Caldwell, Mr. Caldwell's wife, and mentioned you might be attending after all. She was thrilled, said she'd make sure you were seated at the main table. Leah stopped walking. You did what? I prepared the battlefield. Nina's smile was pure strategy. Gavin wants to humiliate you by replacing you with his assistant? Fine. Let's see how that plays when you walk in looking absolutely stunning and get escorted to the head table by the senior partner's wife while he's stuck explaining to everyone why he brought Chloe instead of you. That's insane. That's justice. Nina opened the car door. Now get in. We have a very specific dress to find, and I'm not stopping until we find it. Harvey Nichols was everything Leah had trained herself not to notice. Beautiful clothes at prices that made her anxiety spike even though she wasn't the one paying. But Nina was relentless, pulling dresses from racks with the precision of a general selecting weapons, sending Leah into fitting rooms again and again. Most of them were wrong. Too young, too trendy, too much trying to be something she wasn't. But then Nina handed her a dress in deep crimson, elegant and classic, and said, "Try this one." Leah slipped it on and felt something click into place. The dress was sophisticated without being matronly, fitted without being revealing, the kind of piece that commanded attention through sheer quality rather than flash. The color made her skin glow, brought out the warmth Marcus had restored to her hair. She stepped out of the fitting room, and Nina's expression said everything. "That's the one," her friend said quietly. "That's the one that says, I know exactly who I am, and I don't need your approval." Leah looked at herself in the three-way mirror, turning slowly. The woman looking back at her was someone she almost recognized, confident, poised, present, not invisible at all. "It's too expensive," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It's an investment." Nina was already signaling the sales assistant. "We'll take it. And we need shoes, jewelry, the works." An hour later, they sat in an upscale cafe, bags arranged around their feet, eating overpriced salads that actually tasted like something beyond fuel. Leah felt strange, almost guilty for enjoying herself, for taking up this much space and attention and money on things that were just for her. "Stop," Nina said, reading her expression. "I can literally see you spiraling into guilt. Don't. It's just, what if this is a mistake? What if I'm making everything worse by what? By refusing to disappear?" Nina set down her fork with emphasis. "Leah, listen to me. Gavin has spent years training you to feel guilty for existing, for having needs, for wanting things, for taking up any resources that could go toward his comfort instead. That's not love. That's control." The word landed heavy between them. Control. Was that what this had been all along? "He wasn't always like this," Leah said quietly. "When we first met, he was different, attentive, supportive, proud of my work." "Of course he was. That's how it works." Nina's voice was gentle but firm. "They're wonderful until they're not. They support you until your success starts threatening theirs. Then suddenly everything you do is wrong. Everything you want is unreasonable, and you're the problem that needs fixing." Leah thought about those early years, how Gavin had loved her design work, until clients started calling her directly instead of going through him for referrals. How he'd been proud of her appearance, until other men noticed her at events. How he'd supported her ambitions, until they conflicted with his schedule. "When did I stop noticing?" she asked. "When did I stop seeing what was happening?" "It happened slowly. That's the point." Nina reached across the table and took her hand. "But you're seeing it now. That's what matters." Leah's phone buzzed. A text from Gavin. "When are you coming home? We need to discuss boundaries." She stared at the message, at the audacity of a man who'd told her she was too embarrassing to be seen with, now demanding she come home and submit to his boundaries. "What does he want?" Nina asked. "To discuss boundaries," Leah said, her voice flat. "Oh, the irony." Nina's laugh was sharp. "By all means, let's discuss boundaries. Like the boundary against publicly humiliating your spouse, or the boundary against emotional abuse, or the boundary against treating your partner like a disappointing employee." Leah typed out a response, her fingers steadier than she expected. I'll be home when I'm ready. We can discuss boundaries then. She hit send before she could second guess it, then silenced her phone and dropped it in her purse. Proud of you, Nina said. I feel sick, Leah admitted. Good. That means you're doing something that matters. Nina finished her salad and stood. Come on. One more stop before I let you go home and face the music. The gym was sleek and expensive, all glass and chrome, and people who looked like they'd been born knowing how to operate complicated machinery. Nina led her to the front desk where a trainer named Sophie, compact, muscular, radiating competence, greeted them with a warm smile. This is Leah, Nina said. She needs to remember how strong she is. Sophie's eyes were kind and knowing. Physical strength or the other kind? Both, Leah said, surprising herself. They spent an hour with Sophie, who taught Leah basic movements and explained how strength training worked. It wasn't about losing weight or looking a certain way, Sophie emphasized. It was about feeling capable, about knowing your body could do hard things, about building confidence from the inside out. By the time they finished, Leah was sweating and shaking, but also somehow lighter, like she'd left something heavy on the gym floor along with her doubts. Come back in 2 days, Sophie said. We'll build on this. I will, Leah promised, and meant it. It was late afternoon when Nina finally drove her home. The house looked the same as it always did, neat, expensive, perfect from the outside. But Leah saw it differently now, saw it as the cage it had become. You don't have to go in yet, Nina offered. You can stay with me as long as you need. No, I need to do this. Leah gathered her bags, evidence of a day spent investing in herself, proof that she was still a person who mattered. Thank you, Nina, for everything. This is just the beginning, Nina said. Remember that when things get hard. This is the beginning of getting yourself back. Leah walked into her house expecting confrontation, but found silence instead. No kids. They'd be with Gavin's sister until evening. No Gavin either, though his car was in the driveway. She found him in his office, tie loosened, staring at his computer screen with the particular intensity that meant he was working on something important. He glanced up when she appeared in the doorway, and she watched his eyes track over her new hair, her confident posture, the shopping bags in her hands. His expression flickered, surprise maybe, or something else, before settling back into studied indifference. You're back, he said. I live here, Leah replied evenly. Gavin's jaw tightened. We need to talk about last night. About what you said. What I said? Leah's laugh came out sharp. I barely said anything. You did all the talking. You told me I was invisible. That you didn't want to be seen with me. That you were replacing me at a company event with your assistant. I was honest with you, Gavin said, as if honesty justified cruelty. I told you how I felt, what I needed. What you needed was to humiliate me. Leah set her bags down carefully, deliberately. What you needed was to make me feel so small and worthless that I'd accept whatever scraps of attention you decided I deserved. That's not... He stood, clearly preparing to deploy whatever argument he'd spent the day constructing. You're being dramatic. I gave you honest feedback about areas where you could improve. You told me I was too embarrassing to be seen with, Leah interrupted, her voice level and cold. Don't dress it up as feedback, Gavin. Own what you actually said. His face flushed. You're twisting my words. Am I? Because I remember them very clearly, every single one. She moved into the office, not backing down despite every instinct telling her to make herself small again. You compared me to Nina, implied I'd let myself go, said I was invisible, a shadow, and you proved me right by running to Nina and spending the day God knows where doing God knows what, getting my hair done, having lunch with a friend, buying clothes. Remember clothes, Gavin? The thing you criticized me for not spending enough on? Leah gestured to her new hair. Well, I spent plenty today. Nina's credit card, since you've made it very clear that spending your money on my appearance is somehow both required and offensive. Gavin stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You let Nina pay for... I let my friend support me when my husband decided I wasn't worth supporting. The words came easier now, fueled by the anger she'd been suppressing for so long. Nina thinks I matter, Gavin. She thinks I deserve to feel good about myself. Apparently that's a radical concept in this house. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Gavin's voice rose. This victim mentality, this refusal to take any responsibility. Responsibility for what? For believing you when you said you loved me? For sacrificing my career to support yours? For raising our children while you worked late and traveled and built your perfect life? Leah's voice remained steady, cold as winter. Or are you talking about responsibility for not magically maintaining the exact appearance you prefer while you criticize every penny I spend on myself? I never said you couldn't spend money. You literally waved a credit card statement in my face and mocked me for a 73-pound grocery bill. Leah laughed, the sound bitter and foreign. And a 45-pound haircut that apparently wasn't good enough anyway. Gavin opened his mouth, closed it. For once, he seemed unable to find the words to make this her fault. I'm going to the gala, Leah said into the silence. What? The company gala. I'm going. She said it with finality, with certainty she didn't entirely feel but was determined to project. I'm still a partner's wife, whether you acknowledge it or not. I have every right to be there. Gavin's face went through several shades of red. You can't be serious. After I specifically told you you told me you were taking Chloe. Fine, take her. But you don't get to tell me I can't attend a semi-public event that I've been going to for years. Leah picked up her shopping bags again. Judith Caldwell is expecting me. I'll be seated at the main table with the senior partners and their wives. Where you and Chloe sit is entirely up to you. Leah, you're being ridiculous. I'm being clear, she corrected. Maybe for the first time in a long time. You want to parade your assistant around like I don't exist? Go ahead. But I'm not going to disappear to make it easier for you. She walked out before he could respond, carried her bags upstairs to their bedroom, and locked the door behind her. Her hands were shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system, but underneath the fear was something else. Something that felt like power. Gavin pounded on the door 10 minutes later. Leah, open this door. We're not done talking. Yes, we are, she called back. I'm done listening to you tell me who I should be. If you want to have an actual conversation where you treat me like a person instead of a problem, we can do that. But not tonight. Silence. Then footsteps retreating down the hallway, heavy and angry. Leah sank onto the bed, still wearing her coat, surrounded by shopping bags that contained a version of herself she was still learning to recognize. Her phone buzzed, Nina checking in, making sure she was okay. I told him I'm going to the gala, Leah texted back. Nina's response was immediate. Good. How did he take it? About as well as you'd expect. I think I'm sleeping with the door locked tonight. Want me to come get you? Leah considered it, then typed. No, I need to hold this ground. Because that's what this was, she realized. Ground, territory. The space to exist without permission, without apology, without constantly adjusting herself to fit someone else's requirements. She'd spent 8 years surrendering ground, 1 inch at a time, until she'd forgotten she was allowed to stand firm. But Nina was right. This was just the beginning. Every small act of claiming space for herself was practice for the bigger claiming to come. The divorce. Because that's where this was heading, wasn't it? She could see it now with sudden clarity. This marriage wasn't salvageable, had maybe never been the partnership she'd thought it was. Gavin didn't want a wife. He wanted an accessory that reflected well on him. And Leah was finally ready to admit she wanted more than that. She deserved more than that. The door lock clicked, Gavin trying his key from the outside, finding it wouldn't turn with her lock engaged. More silence. Then his voice, carefully controlled, "This is childish, Leah." She didn't respond. Let him think what he wanted. She was done performing for him. Eventually, she heard him go downstairs, heard the front door open and close, probably going to pick up Ben and Mia. She stayed where she was, gathering her strength for the performance she'd have to give when the kids came home. The performance of normalcy, of everything being fine, of Mommy and Daddy just having a disagreement. Except she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep performing, how much longer she should. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, then recognized the area code. Hello? Mrs. Cross, this is Judith Caldwell. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Leah sat up straighter, surprised. Mrs. Caldwell, no, not at all. How are you? Please, call me Judith. I'm well, thank you. I wanted to reach out personally about the gala. Nina mentioned you might be attending, and I wanted to make sure you knew how delighted we'd be to have you there. The warmth in Judith's voice was genuine, and it made Leah's throat tight. Thank you. I wasn't sure if... Nonsense. You've been to every gala for the past 8 years. Why wouldn't you come to this one? There was a pause, then Judith's voice dropped slightly. Nina also mentioned you might need some moral support. I just want you to know that you'll have it. The partners' wives have been asking about you, actually. We've missed seeing you at events. Had they? Leah had assumed her absence had gone unnoticed, that she'd faded from their social circle without anyone caring. That's very kind, she managed. It's honest, Judith corrected gently. You always brought such lovely energy to these gatherings. And your insights on design, several of us have been dying to pick your brain about projects we're working on. Perhaps we could arrange lunch soon? They talked for a few more minutes, Judith sharing details about the gala and confirming Leah's seat at the main table. By the time they hung up, Leah felt steadier, more certain that she wasn't imagining the possibility of a life beyond Gavin's shadow. She heard the front door again, Ben and Mia's voices, bright and innocent. She unlocked her bedroom door and went downstairs to greet them, slipping back into the role of mother with practiced ease. Mom! Mia launched herself forward. Aunt Sarah took us for ice cream and... She stopped, staring at Leah's hair. You look different. Good different or bad different? Leah asked, smoothing her daughter's hair. Pretty different, Mia decided, like a princess. Ben was more reserved, watching his parents with the careful attention of an 8-year-old who sensed tension he didn't understand. Are you and Dad fighting? We had a disagreement, Leah said honestly. Sometimes grown-ups don't see eye to eye, but we're working through it. Gavin appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. Kids, go wash up for dinner. When they were alone, he turned to Leah. We need to present a united front. Then maybe you shouldn't have told me I was too embarrassing to appear with you in public, Leah said quietly. His jaw worked. I'm trying to move forward here. So am I, she said. Just not in the direction you expected. The next week passed in strange tension. Gavin was coldly polite, treating Leah like a difficult colleague he had to manage, rather than a wife he'd promised to love. She matched his tone, refusing to engage in the old patterns of apologizing and accommodating and making herself smaller to ease his discomfort. She went to the gym with Sophie, had lunch with Judith, who introduced her to 2 other partners' wives interested in home renovations, started sketching design concepts for the first time in years, her hand remembering the movements even as her mind struggled to believe she was allowed to want this again. Nina checked in daily, a steady presence reminding Leah she wasn't alone in this. And slowly, incrementally, Leah started to feel like she was rebuilding something. Not just her appearance or her confidence, but her actual self. The person who existed independent of anyone else's approval. The night before the gala, she laid out the red dress, the shoes, the jewelry Nina had helped her select. Gavin saw the display when he came in to grab clothes from the closet he'd mostly abandoned. You're really doing this, he said. I am. People will talk. Let them. Leah met his eyes in the mirror. What's the worst they can say? That your wife had the audacity to attend a company function? That she didn't disappear when you told her to? That my marriage is failing, Gavin said quietly. Then maybe that's the truth they should know, Leah replied. He left without another word, and Leah went to bed early, needing rest for what tomorrow would bring. She dreamed of walking into a room full of people who couldn't see her, of screaming and waving and still being invisible. But then in the dream, Nina appeared, handed her something red and bold, and suddenly everyone turned to look. She woke with her heart pounding and her resolve hardened. Tomorrow, Gavin Cross was going to learn that his wife was done being invisible. And whatever came after that, divorce, scandal, rebuilding her entire life from scratch, she was ready for it. Because the alternative was staying invisible forever. And Leah had finally remembered she was worth more than that. The morning of the gala arrived with unseasonable sunshine, light streaming through the bedroom windows like a spotlight on the red dress hanging from the closet door. Leah woke early, her stomach a tight knot of anticipation and terror, and lay still for a moment, listening to the house wake around her. Gavin was already gone. She'd heard him leave before dawn, muttering something about preparations that couldn't wait. Running away, more likely. Avoiding the conversation they both knew was coming, the one where she refused to back down and he had to face the reality that his control was slipping. Downstairs, she found Ben and Mia at the kitchen table. Gavin's sister Sarah supervising breakfast with the slightly harried expression of someone who'd agreed to babysit without fully understanding what she was walking into. "Morning," Sarah said, relief flickering across her face when she saw Leah. "I hope it's okay I stayed over. Gavin said you both had early starts today." "It's fine. Thank you for being here." Leah poured herself coffee, grateful for the buffer Sarah's presence provided. No drama in front of family, no revealing the cracks in the foundation while someone else was watching. "Big event tonight?" Sarah asked, and there was something in her tone that suggested she knew more than she was saying. Had Gavin told her? Complained about his difficult wife who refused to disappear on command? "The company Gala," Leah said neutrally. "Black tie, all the partners and their families." "Sounds fancy." Sarah glanced at her, then away. "Gavin mentioned he had a lot on his mind this week. Work stress, I guess." Work stress. Right. That's what they were calling it. "It's been a complicated week," Leah allowed, and left it at that. She spent the morning with Ben and Mia, taking them to the park and pushing away thoughts of tonight. They played on the swings, chased each other through fallen leaves, laughed at nothing the way children did when the world was still simple and parents were still infallible. Leah watched them and felt her resolve harden further. Whatever happened tonight, whatever came after, she would not let her children grow up thinking this version of marriage was normal. Ben deserved to see what partnership looked like. Mia deserved to understand that being a woman didn't mean shrinking yourself to fit someone else's requirements. They deserved better than what she'd been modeling. By mid-afternoon, Nina appeared at the door with a makeup artist in tow and an expression that brooked no argument. "Sarah's taking the kids to the cinema. You have 3 hours to get ready, and we're not rushing any of it." The transformation began in Leah's bedroom, which Nina had somehow converted into a small salon. The makeup artist, a serene woman named Claire, worked with quiet efficiency, enhancing rather than covering, bringing out features Leah had forgotten she had. "You have beautiful bone structure," Claire murmured, brushing something shimmery across Leah's cheekbones. "Classic, timeless. Invisible," Gavin had called her. "A shadow." The woman looking back from the mirror was neither of those things. "Tell me again why we're doing this," Leah said, her voice wavering slightly as Claire applied lipstick in a shade that matched the dress perfectly. "Because Gavin Cross needs to understand what he's losing," Nina said from her position on the bed, where she was scrolling through her phone with single-minded focus. "Because those partners' wives need to see you've been here all along. Because Chloe Reed needs to learn that being young and convenient doesn't make you irreplaceable. And because you deserve to feel powerful," Claire added softly, meeting Leah's eyes in the mirror. "Not for anyone else. For you." By the time Claire finished, Leah barely recognized herself. The makeup was flawless but natural, emphasizing her eyes and the curve of her mouth without looking overdone. Her hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, the color Marcus had given her catching the light. She looked polished, elegant, completely in control. She looked like someone who mattered. "Now the dress," Nina commanded, and Leah slipped into the crimson fabric like armor. It fit perfectly, hugging her curves without clinging, the neckline just low enough to be sophisticated without trying too hard. She stepped into the heels Nina had chosen, black, simple, the kind that added height and confidence in equal measure. When she turned to face the full-length mirror, the woman staring back was a stranger and a memory all at once. This was who she'd been before Gavin had spent years teaching her to doubt herself. This was who she could be again, if she was brave enough to claim it. "Perfect," Nina breathed. "Absolutely perfect." Leah's hands shook as she fastened the delicate necklace Nina handed her. "What if this is a mistake? What if I'm just making everything worse?" "Then it'll be worse," Nina said bluntly, "but at least you'll be worse on your own terms instead of his." The hotel hosting the gala was one of Manchester's finest, all marble columns and crystal chandeliers and the kind of understated luxury that whispered old money. Leah arrived alone. Nina had offered to come, but this was something she needed to do herself. She pulled up to the valet stand in her own car, a modest sedan that looked out of place among the luxury vehicles, and took a moment to steady her breathing before getting out. Through the hotel's glass doors, she could see people already arriving, men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns, the kind of crowd Gavin loved, the kind of crowd where he could shine, make connections, be seen with the right people. She was about to ruin his entire evening. The thought should have made her anxious. Instead, it made her smile. Leah stepped out of her car, handed the keys to a valet who did a double take at her appearance, and walked through those glass doors like she owned the place. The ballroom was at the end of a long corridor, and she could hear music and conversation spilling out, the sound of a party already in full swing. She paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. Round tables draped in white linen, centerpieces of white roses and candlelight, a string quartet playing something classical and elegant in the corner. People clustered in groups, partners and their spouses networking and socializing, the air thick with expensive perfume and carefully managed ambition. And there, near the bar, was Gavin. He looked good. He always looked good at these things, knew exactly how to wear a tuxedo and carry himself like success personified. But it wasn't Gavin who made Leah's breath catch. It was the woman beside him. Chloe Reed was everything Gavin had implied Leah wasn't. Young, bright-eyed, wearing a black dress that showed off her figure without quite crossing into inappropriate. She was laughing at something Gavin had said, her hand resting lightly on his arm, playing the role of adoring companion with practiced ease. For a moment, the old Leah wanted to turn around and run, wanted to disappear back into the shadows where she wouldn't have to see this, wouldn't have to feel the sharp edge of being replaced. But the new Leah, the one in the red dress who'd remembered she was worth something, lifted her chin and walked into that ballroom like she was meant to be there, because she was. The first person to notice her was Thomas Caldwell himself, the senior partner whose approval Gavin had been chasing for years. He was standing near the entrance with his wife Judith, and his eyes widened slightly when he saw Leah. "Mrs. Cross," he said, his voice carrying warmth and genuine pleasure. "What a delightful surprise! Judith mentioned you might be joining us, but I hardly dared hope." Judith appeared at his elbow, resplendent in emerald green, and her smile was knowing and kind. "Leah, darling, you look absolutely stunning. That dress is perfection." "Thank you both for making room for me," Leah said, and was proud of how steady her voice sounded. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Intruding?" Thomas laughed, the sound booming and genuine. "You're a partner's wife. You belong here as much as anyone. Come, let me escort you to the main table. I insist." He offered his arm, and Leah took it, letting him guide her through the ballroom. She was aware of people turning to look, conversations pausing mid-sentence, eyes tracking her progress across the room. She kept her head high, her expression serene, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her falter. And then she saw the moment Gavin noticed her. He'd been mid-sentence, saying something to Chloe while reaching for a drink, when his gaze drifted toward the entrance and landed on his wife. The glass froze halfway to his mouth. His face went through a rapid succession of expressions: shock, disbelief, anger, something that might have been fear, before settling into a mask of careful neutrality. But it was too late. Leah had seen the crack in his composure, and it felt like victory. Chloe noticed his distraction and turned to see what had captured his attention. When she spotted Leah, her bright smile faltered. She looked young suddenly, uncertain, like a child who'd wandered into a game she didn't understand. "Here we are," Thomas announced, pulling out a chair for Leah at the head table, right between himself and another senior partner named Richard Morrison. "Judith, you're on Richard's other side, aren't you? Perfect. Leah, you remember Richard and his wife Susan?" "Of course." Leah settled into her seat with as much grace as she could manage, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "It's lovely to see you both again." "The pleasure is ours," Susan said, leaning forward with obvious interest. "Judith tells us you're getting back into interior design. I'd love to hear about it." "We've been thinking about renovating our holiday home in the Cotswolds, and I'm desperate for someone with actual vision instead of just following whatever's trendy." And just like that, Leah was absorbed into conversation, the partners' wives welcoming her like she'd never been gone. They asked about her design philosophy, shared their own renovation nightmares, laughed at the right moments, and listened with genuine interest. It felt surreal, being treated like she mattered, like her opinions had value beyond how they reflected on Gavin. Across the room, she could see her husband watching, his jaw tight with suppressed fury. Chloe stood beside him, looking increasingly uncomfortable as other attendees approached to greet them and inevitably asked where Gavin's wife was. He'd have to explain. Have to justify why he'd brought his assistant when his wife was seated at the head table with the senior partners. Leah sipped her champagne and let him squirm. Dinner was served, some elaborate multi-course affair that Leah barely tasted through her heightened awareness of everything around her. She was conscious of every glance thrown her way, every whispered conversation that might be about her. Every moment Gavin's eyes found her across the room with that mix of anger and something else she couldn't quite name. "You're handling this beautifully," Judith murmured at one point, leaning close enough that only Leah could hear. "Whatever's happening between you and Gavin, you're handling it with remarkable grace." Leah turned to her, surprised by the directness. "You know, I've been married to a partner at this firm for 30 years, Judith said with a knowing smile. "I know everything. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Before Leah could answer, Thomas stood and tapped his champagne glass with a knife, calling the room to attention. The conversations died down as he launched into the traditional welcome speech, thanking everyone for attending and celebrating another successful year for the firm. Leah listened with half her attention, the rest focused on maintaining her composure while her entire body thrummed with nervous energy. This was it. This was the moment where everything either fell apart or came together. "And now," Thomas was saying, "I'd like to invite our partners and their companions to join me for the traditional toast. Gavin, if you'd bring your guest up here." The room turned to look at Gavin, who'd gone slightly pale. He recovered quickly, taking Chloe's elbow and guiding her toward the front of the room. But Leah could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he avoided looking at the head table where his wife sat. They reached the front, and Thomas gestured for them to stand beside him. "This is Chloe Reed, one of our brightest young talents in the firm. Gavin's brought her along tonight to show her what these events are all about. Chloe, welcome." Chloe smiled nervously, clearly unsure of her role in this moment. Around the room, Leah could see the confusion on people's faces, the subtle glances between partners' wives that said they were all thinking the same thing. Where was Gavin's actual wife? And then Richard Morrison, bless him, said exactly what everyone was thinking. "And Leah," he called out, rising from his seat beside her, "stand up, won't you? We can't have a proper toast without all the partners' families represented." Leah stood, and the room's attention shifted to her like a spotlight. She met Gavin's eyes across the distance, saw the fury and humiliation there, and felt nothing but calm certainty. "There we are," Thomas said smoothly, reading the room and adapting with the political skill that had made him senior partner. "To all our partners and their families, for their dedication and support throughout another remarkable year." "Hear, hear," the room echoed, raising glasses. The toast completed, people began to mingle again, moving between tables and forming new conversational clusters. Leah remained at the head table, a steady presence, while Gavin was forced to navigate the room with Chloe, explaining over and over again why he'd brought his assistant instead of his wife. She watched him work the room, saw the way his charm turned brittle around the edges, noticed how Chloe seemed to shrink with each confused question about Leah's presence. Whatever fantasy Gavin had constructed about this evening, about showing up with someone young and pretty and making Leah feel replaced, was crumbling around him. "Dance with me," a voice said beside her. Leah turned to find James Richardson, another partner she'd known for years, offering his hand with a kind smile. "Your husband seems occupied, and it's a crime for a woman in a dress like that to spend the evening sitting down." She took his hand and let him lead her to the dance floor, where several other couples were already swaying to the quartet's music. James was a competent dancer, leading her through the steps with easy confidence while making light conversation about his daughter's university applications and his wife's latest charity project. But Leah was aware of every eye on her, every whispered conversation that paused as she passed. She was the story of the evening now, the partner's wife who'd shown up despite being replaced, who'd claimed her seat at the head table and refused to disappear. "Whatever you're doing," James said quietly as the song wound down, "it's working. Gavin looks like he's having the worst night of his life." Leah glanced over to where her husband stood, trapped in conversation with a group of junior partners while Chloe hovered awkwardly beside him. He caught her looking and his expression darkened further. "That's not why I'm here," Leah said, though it wasn't entirely true. "No?" James smiled. "Then why are you here?" "Because I'm tired of being invisible," she said simply. The evening wore on, a strange performance where Leah played the role of gracious partner's wife while her marriage disintegrated in real time. She danced with several partners, spoke with their wives about design and children and the peculiar politics of corporate life. She was charming and present and everything Gavin had claimed she wasn't. And through it all, she watched her husband unravel. It happened slowly at first. Small things, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the tension in his shoulders that no amount of expensive tailoring could hide, the frequency with which he downed glasses of champagne. Chloe seemed to sense his shifting mood, her own bright enthusiasm dampening as the evening progressed, and she realized she'd been cast in a role she hadn't fully understood. Finally, as the evening was winding toward its close, Gavin made his move. Leah was at the bar, ordering water to cut through the champagne haze, when she felt his presence behind her. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and tight with barely controlled rage. "Now!" She turned to face him, taking in his flushed face and the dangerous glint in his eyes. "We're in the middle of an event, Gavin. This isn't the time." "You made it the time when you showed up here after I explicitly told you not to." He moved closer, crowding her space in a way that would have made her back down a week ago. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Attending a company function I've been invited to for 8 consecutive years," Leah said calmly. "The same thing I've always done." "With me," he hissed. "You attend with me, not by yourself, making me look like a fool in front of the entire firm." "I'm not the one who brought his assistant to a partner's gala," Leah pointed out. "That particular choice was all yours." Gavin's face went a deeper shade of red. "Chloe is here for professional development. Chloe is here because you wanted to humiliate me," Leah interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying an edge she'd never used with him before. "You wanted to replace me, make me feel worthless and invisible. Well, I'm sorry the plan didn't work out the way you expected." "You're embarrassing yourself," Gavin said, but there was something desperate in his tone now. "Everyone can see what you're doing. This pathetic attempt to what?" Leah's anger, held carefully in check all evening, finally began to surface. "To exist? To refuse to disappear just because you decided I wasn't good enough anymore?" "Keep your voice down," Gavin warned, glancing around at the nearby guests who were trying very hard to pretend they weren't listening. "Why?" Leah asked, and she could feel something cracking open inside her, all the words she'd swallowed for years demanding to be spoken. "Afraid people might hear the truth? Afraid they might find out that you told your wife she was too embarrassing to be seen with, then brought your 26-year-old assistant to a formal event instead?" "Leah." There was warning in his voice, the old pattern of him setting boundaries and her respecting them. But she was done with old patterns. "You don't get to control this narrative, Gavin," she said, her voice steady and cold. "You don't get to rewrite our marriage as me being the problem, me being the one who failed. You destroyed this. You spent years taking until there was nothing left of me, and then you had the audacity to criticize the empty space you created." "I gave you everything," Gavin shot back, his own voice rising now despite his earlier warning. "A home, security, a life most women would kill for, and you couldn't even be bothered to what? To perform gratitude enthusiastically enough? To maintain whatever image you decided I should have while you criticized every penny I spent trying to achieve it?" Leah set her water glass down with careful precision. "I gave you everything too, Gavin. My career, my independence, my identity. I gave you 8 years of my life, 2 children, and complete devotion. And the moment I stopped being useful to your image, you replaced me with someone younger. This isn't..." Gavin seemed to realize they'd drawn an audience, that several conversations had stopped entirely as people openly watched the partner and his wife destroy each other in public. He grabbed Leah's arm, his grip tight enough to hurt. "We're leaving. Both of us. Right now." Leah looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. "Take your hand off me. We're going to step outside and have a private conversation like adults. I said, take your hand off me." Her voice cut through his words like a knife, loud enough that the nearby conversation stopped entirely. Gavin's grip loosened, but he didn't let go. "Leah, I'm warning you, and I'm telling you." She yanked her arm free, the movement sharp enough to make him stumble slightly. "Don't touch me. Don't threaten me. Don't act like you have any authority over what I do or where I go or how I exist in the world." The ballroom had gone quiet now, the quartet trailing off mid-song, all eyes on the unfolding drama. Leah was dimly aware of Thomas Caldwell moving toward them, of Judith's concerned expression, of Chloe standing frozen near the bar with wide, horrified eyes. But mostly she was aware of Gavin, of the ugly fury on his face and the realization dawning behind it, that he was losing control, that the script he'd written for this evening had been torn up entirely. "You're making a scene," he said, trying for calm authority and achieving only desperate anger. "You're embarrassing both of us." "No, Gavin." Leah's voice was quiet now, but it carried through the silent room. "I'm done being embarrassed. If you want to have a conversation about boundaries and respect and what's appropriate in a marriage, we can do that. But we're going to have it honestly, in front of witnesses, or not at all. Is everything all right here?" Thomas had reached them, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes sharp with understanding. "Gavin? Leah?" Gavin's face went through several rapid transformations before settling on a rictus of professional courtesy. "Everything's fine, Thomas. Just a small disagreement. Leah and I were about to step outside for some air." "Were we?" Leah turned to Thomas, to Judith who'd joined him, to the circle of partners and their wives who'd formed around this disaster. "Because I was under the impression that Gavin wanted to drag me outside to tell me privately all the ways I failed him tonight by refusing to disappear on command." "Leah." Gavin's voice held a warning that might have worked on the old version of her, but she was done being warned. "You told me I was invisible," she said, looking directly at him now, letting him see all the hurt and anger she'd been hiding. "You said I wasn't worth being seen with. You compared me to other women, criticized my appearance, mocked my spending, and then replaced me with someone young enough to be flattered by your attention. So tell me, Gavin, in front of all these people who respect you so much, which of us is the embarrassment here?" The silence that followed was absolute. Gavin stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without sound, his face cycling through shades of red and white as he struggled to find a response that wouldn't confirm everything she'd just said. He couldn't. There was no defense that wouldn't be a lie, and they both knew it. "I think," Thomas said carefully into the silence, "that perhaps we should all take a moment to collect ourselves. Gavin, why don't you and I have a word in the lobby? Judith, could you and Leah perhaps—" "I'm leaving," Leah said quietly. She looked at Gavin one more time, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Not the man she'd married, not the partner she'd tried to support, but the person he'd actually become. Small and cruel and terrified of anything he couldn't control. She turned to Judith. "Thank you for tonight, for making me feel welcome, for reminding me I'm allowed to take up space." Then to Thomas, "I'm sorry for disrupting your event. That wasn't my intention." "You disrupted nothing," Judith said firmly, moving to Leah's side. "You were invited, you attended, and you conducted yourself with more grace than anyone could have expected under the circumstances." Leah collected her small clutch from where she'd left it at the bar, aware of every eye following her movements. She walked toward the exit with her head high, her red dress like a flag of surrender she'd decided not to wave. Behind her, she heard Gavin start to say something, his voice rising with either explanation or accusation, but she didn't turn around. Didn't give him the satisfaction of her attention. She pushed through the ballroom doors, through the elegant corridor, through the hotel's glass entrance and out into the cool night air. The valet brought her car around quickly, and she slipped behind the wheel with hands that only started shaking once she was safely alone. For a long moment, she just sat there, engine running, letting the reality of what had just happened wash over her. She'd done it. She'd stood up to Gavin in front of everyone who mattered to his career, refused to let him control the narrative, spoken truths he'd spent years trying to bury. And she felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a bone-deep exhaustion, and something that might have been grief for the marriage she'd thought she had, but never did. Her phone buzzed. "Nina, I heard. Judith just called me. Are you okay? Where are you?" Leah stared at the message, then typed back, "Leaving the hotel. I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. She put the car in drive and pulled away from the hotel, leaving the Gala and Gavin and the wreckage of 8 years behind her. Tomorrow there would be consequences, fallout, difficult conversations about what came next. Tomorrow she'd have to face her children and figure out how to explain that their family was breaking apart. But tonight, She'd done something more important than saving her marriage or protecting Gavin's reputation or maintaining the illusion of happiness. Tonight, she'd saved herself. And as she drove through Manchester's quiet streets toward Nina's house in safety and whatever came next, Leah Cross allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Free. Nina's living room was warm and bright despite the late hour, soft lamps casting golden light across furniture that somehow managed to be both elegant and comfortable. Leah collapsed onto the cream sofa, still wearing the red dress. Her heels kicked off somewhere between the front door and the cushions and let the adrenaline finally drain away. Here. Nina pressed a glass of wine into her hand and settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Drink first, talk after. Leah sipped obediently, the wine sharp and grounding, pulling her back into her body after hours of existing in pure survival mode. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop since she'd left the hotel. Calls from Gavin that she'd ignored, texts that she'd deleted without reading, notifications she'd silenced with shaking fingers. Judith said you were magnificent, Nina offered after a moment. Said you handled yourself with more grace and dignity than Gavin deserved. I called him out in front of everyone, Leah said, staring into her wine. I made a scene, exposed our marriage problems to his entire firm. That's the opposite of grace. No, love. That's honesty. Nina squeezed her hand. And sometimes honesty looks messy because the truth is messy. But you didn't make this mess. Gavin did. You just stopped pretending it didn't exist. Leah closed her eyes, seeing it all again. Gavin's face when she'd walked in, the shock rippling through the ballroom, the awful moment when she'd yanked her arm free and told him not to touch her, in front of everyone, in front of his colleagues and superiors, and the people whose opinions mattered most to his carefully constructed image. He's never going to forgive me for this, she whispered. Good, Nina said fiercely. Let him stay angry. Let him understand what it feels like to be humiliated, to have someone treat you like you're worthless. You gave him 8 years of forgiveness for things that should never have been forgiven. You don't owe him one more second. The words settled into Leah's chest, heavy and true. She didn't owe Gavin forgiveness, didn't owe him her silence or her compliance or her continued participation in the fiction that their marriage was salvageable. She was done owing him anything. What happens now? Leah asked, opening her eyes to find Nina watching her with concern and fierce protectiveness in equal measure. Now you sleep, Nina said firmly. And tomorrow, we call a lawyer. The word hung between them, making everything real in a way it hadn't been before. Lawyer meant divorce, meant splitting assets and custody arrangements, and explaining to Ben and Mia why their family was breaking apart. It meant making permanent what right now still felt surreal and temporary. I'm scared, Leah admitted. I know. Nina pulled her into a hug that smelled like expensive perfume and safety. But you're also brave. You proved that tonight. Leah stayed at Nina's that night, borrowing clothes and sleeping in the guest room that had become a familiar refuge. She slept poorly, her mind cycling through the evening's events and the 100 different ways it could have gone. The things she should have said or shouldn't have said, the moments she could have handled better. But underneath the anxiety was something else, something that felt almost like peace. She'd stopped pretending, stopped protecting Gavin's image at the expense of her own dignity. That had to count for something. Morning came too quickly, sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. Leah's phone showed 43 missed calls from Gavin and a series of increasingly desperate texts that she scrolled through with detached curiosity. The first few were angry. How dare you embarrass me like that? You've ruined everything. Then came justification. You forced my hand. If you hadn't shown up, none of this would have happened. Then attempted manipulation. The kids are asking where you are. They're confused and upset. Is this what you want for them? And finally, fear disguised as concern. We need to talk before you do something you'll regret. Please, Leah, come home so we can fix this. She set the phone down without responding and went downstairs where Nina was already on her laptop, reading glasses perched on her nose, looking every inch the successful businesswoman she was. Coffee's fresh, Nina said without looking up. And I have a name for you, Rebecca Chen, best family law attorney in Manchester, absolutely ruthless when she needs to be, and she's agreed to see you this afternoon. This afternoon? Leah's stomach clenched. That's fast. That's necessary. Nina finally looked up, her expression serious. Gavin's going to try to control this narrative, Leah. He's probably already calling his own lawyer, figuring out how to protect his assets and his reputation. You need someone in your corner who knows how to fight. The thought of fighting made Leah tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. What if I don't want to fight? What if I just want this to be over? Then you'll get run over, Nina said bluntly. I know you're exhausted. I know you want peace. But Gavin isn't going to make this easy, not after what happened last night. He's humiliated and angry, and men like him don't react well to losing control. As if summoned by the conversation, Leah's phone rang again. Gavin's name flashed on the screen, insistent and demanding even in digital form. Answer it, Nina said. Put it on speaker. Let's hear what he has to say. Leah's finger hovered over the accept button, then pressed down. Hello, Gavin. Where the hell are you? His voice was tight, controlled fury barely contained. You didn't come home last night. The kids woke up asking for you, and I had to explain that their mother decided to abandon them. I didn't abandon anyone, Leah interrupted, her own voice surprisingly steady. I'm taking some space to think. The kids are with you, which means they're fine. They're not fine, Leah. They're confused and upset because you made a scene at my work event and then disappeared. Do you have any idea what you've done? The damage you've caused? Yes, she said quietly. I stood up for myself. I refused to be humiliated quietly. If that caused you damage, maybe you should think about why. There was a pause, the kind of silence that felt like Gavin regrouping, changing tactics. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something that might have been conciliatory if she couldn't hear the calculation underneath. Look, I understand you're upset. Last night it got out of hand for both of us. But we need to think about the children, about what's best for this family. Come home. We'll talk this through like adults. We tried talking, Gavin. You told me I was invisible and replaced me with your assistant. That's not a conversation. That's a declaration. I never said I was replacing you. Yes, you did. Leah's grip tightened on the phone. You said you didn't want to be seen with me anymore. You brought Chloe to an event I should have attended. You made it very clear that I didn't measure up to whatever standard you decided mattered. You're twisting everything, Gavin said, frustration creeping back into his voice. I gave you honest feedback about areas where you could improve, and you turned it into some kind of personal attack. You're being overly sensitive. Don't. The word came out sharp, cutting through his practiced dismissal. Don't tell me I'm being sensitive. Don't tell me I misunderstood or overreacted or any of the other things you've spent years saying when I tried to tell you that you were hurting me. Leah, I want a divorce. The words fell into the conversation like stones into still water, creating ripples that couldn't be taken back. Nina's eyes widened slightly, surprise and pride flickering across her face. Leah felt strangely calm, like she'd finally said something true after years of dancing around the edges of honesty. The silence on Gavin's end stretched long enough that she wondered if he'd hung up. Then, you don't mean that. I do. Leah, listen to yourself. You're making a life-altering decision because you're angry about one argument. This isn't about one argument, she said. This is about 8 years of you making me smaller, taking what you needed and criticizing me for not having more to give. This is about realizing I've been trying to save a marriage to someone who doesn't actually want a partner. He wants an accessory that makes him look good. That's not fair, isn't it? Leah stood, pacing Nina's kitchen with the phone pressed to her ear. Tell me honestly, Gavin, when was the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When did you last support something I wanted that didn't benefit you? When did you ever treat me like I mattered for more than what I could do for you? Another silence. She'd surprised him, cornered him in a place where his usual deflections wouldn't work. I'm calling a lawyer, she continued, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. You should do the same. We can handle this civilly if you're willing, but either way, I'm done. If you do this, Gavin said, and now his voice had gone cold, dangerous in a way she recognized, I will make sure everyone knows it was your choice, your decision to blow up this family. I'll make sure the kids understand who gave up on us. There it was, the threat she'd been expecting, the manipulation disguised as consequence. You do what you need to do, Leah said. But I'm not backing down because you're threatening to turn our children against me. Ben and Mia will understand the truth eventually, and I'd rather them see me stand up for myself than watch me disappear trying to please someone who's never going to be satisfied. You're making a mistake. Maybe, she allowed. But it's my mistake to make. I'll be by later today to get some of my things. Please don't be there. She hung up before he could respond, then immediately turned off her phone so she wouldn't see the barrage of messages she knew would follow. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with her, but underneath the fear was something that felt like relief. She'd said it. She'd made it real. Well, Nina said into the silence. That was something. Leah laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. Did that actually just happen? Did I really just tell Gavin I want a divorce? You did. Nina stood and pulled her into a hug. And I'm so incredibly proud of you. The lawyer's office was in a sleek building downtown, all glass and steel, and the kind of quiet efficiency that spoke of expensive hourly rates. Rebecca Chen was younger than Leah had expected, maybe mid-40s, with sharp eyes behind elegant frames, and the kind of presence that suggested she didn't suffer fools gladly. Mrs. Cross, she said, gesturing Leah into a leather chair across from her desk. Nina's told me a bit about your situation. Why don't you walk me through what's happened, and we'll see what we're working with? Leah had thought she'd have to work up to it, find a way to explain 8 years of slow erosion in a way that made sense. But Rebecca's calm professionalism made it easier somehow, and the words came tumbling out. Gavin's criticism, the credit card statement, being replaced at the gala, the public confrontation, the years of feeling like she was never quite enough. Rebecca listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp with understanding. When Leah finished, she sat back and studied her for a long moment. First question, Rebecca said. Are you certain you want a divorce? Not a separation or counseling, but an actual end to this marriage? Leah thought about Gavin's face at the gala, the cold fury in his voice on the phone this morning, the years of feeling invisible in her own life. Yes, I'm certain. Good. Certainty makes this process much simpler. Rebecca pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Second question. Are you concerned about your physical safety? Has Gavin ever been violent or threatening in a way that makes you fear for yourself or your children? No, Leah said, then paused. Not physically. But he grabbed my arm last night at the gala, hard enough that it hurt. And the way he talks to me sometimes, the things he says, it feels violent even if he's never hit me. Rebecca's expression hardened slightly. Emotional abuse is still abuse, Mrs. Cross. The fact that he hasn't struck you doesn't make his behavior acceptable. We'll document everything, including the incident at the gala. Were there witnesses? About 50 of them, Leah said with a bitter laugh, including his senior partner and most of the firm's leadership. Even better, public incidents are harder to deny. Rebecca made another note. Now, let's talk about assets. Do you have a clear picture of your financial situation? That was where it got complicated. Leah had been shut out of their finances for years, told that Gavin handled the money, and she didn't need to worry about it. She knew roughly what their house was worth, knew they had retirement accounts and investments, but the specifics were murky. I'll need everything, Rebecca said. Bank statements, investment accounts, retirement funds, property deeds, tax returns for the last 7 years. Can you access those documents? They're in Gavin's office. He keeps everything locked in a filing cabinet. Then we'll get a court order for full financial disclosure. In the meantime, I want you to pull your credit report. Make sure there aren't any accounts or loans you don't know about. Men who are controlling about money often have financial secrets. The afternoon passed in a blur of legal terminology and strategic planning. Rebecca explained custody arrangements and asset division, walked her through what divorce proceedings typically look like, outlined best case and worst case scenarios with the kind of clinical detachment that was oddly comforting. One more thing, Rebecca said as they were wrapping up. Gavin's going to try to paint you as unstable. The woman who made a scene at his work event, who abandoned her children, who's having some kind of breakdown, that's standard procedure for men trying to maintain control. So we need you to be absolutely beyond reproach. No social media posts about the marriage. No discussing details with anyone except me and people protected by privilege. No dramatic gestures or public confrontations. I think the dramatic gesture's ship has sailed, Leah said wryly. Last night was justified, and witnesses will confirm that. But from here forward, you're the calm, rational one. The devoted mother who's making the difficult but necessary choice to leave an unhealthy situation. Can you do that? Leah nodded, feeling the weight of it settling onto her shoulders. She'd have to be perfect now, in all the ways she'd failed to be perfect for Gavin, except this time it was for herself and her children. I can do that, she said. By the time she left Rebecca's office, the sun was setting, and Leah felt simultaneously more grounded and more terrified than she had that morning. She had a lawyer, she had a plan, she had concrete steps to follow instead of just floating in the chaos of a dissolving marriage. Nina was waiting in the car, and they drove to Leah's house in silence. Gavin's car wasn't in the driveway. He'd listened, at least, about not being there. Leah let herself in with shaking hands and moved through the familiar rooms that suddenly felt like enemy territory. She packed quickly and efficiently, years of managing a household translating into knowing exactly what she needed. Clothes for a week, toiletries, important documents from the lockbox in her closet, the few pieces of jewelry that had been her mother's, photos of Ben and Mia from the mantel, her old design portfolio from the back of the office closet, dusty but intact. She was loading the last box into her car when Gavin's sister Sarah pulled up with Ben and Mia in the back seat. The kids tumbled out, running to her with the uncomplicated joy of children who didn't yet understand that their world was fracturing. "Mom!" Mia wrapped around her waist. "Where did you go? Dad said you were sick." "I wasn't feeling well," Leah said, technically honest. "But I'm better now. How was school?" "Boring," Ben said, watching her with those two perceptive eyes. "Are you coming home now?" Sarah cleared her throat from beside the car, her expression uncomfortable. "Gavin asked me to talk to you. He said that you two were having problems." "We are," Leah said, meeting her sister-in-law's gaze evenly. "But that's between Gavin and me. Thank you for watching the kids." "He said you're talking about divorce." Sarah's voice dropped, glancing at Ben and Mia. "Is that true?" "It is." "Leah, I know my brother can be difficult, but don't you think you should try counseling first, for the children's sake?" There it was. The pressure she'd known was coming, the voices telling her she hadn't tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, given enough of herself to make this work. "Sarah, I appreciate your concern," Leah said quietly. "But you don't know what happens in our marriage when no one else is watching. You don't know what Gavin says to me, how he treats me, the ways he spent years making me feel worthless. So please don't tell me to try harder or think of the children. I am thinking of them. I'm thinking about what they learned by watching their mother stay with someone who doesn't respect her." Sarah's face flushed. "I'm just trying to help." "Then help by not making this harder than it already is." Leah turned to the kids. "Ben, Mia, I need you to go inside and pack a bag. Pajamas, clothes for school tomorrow, your toothbrushes. Can you do that for me?" "Are we going somewhere?" Mia asked, excitement mixing with uncertainty. "We're staying with Aunt Nina for a few days," Leah said, the decision crystallizing as she spoke. "Just while Dad and I work some things out." Ben's face crumpled. "You're leaving Dad?" The pain in his voice nearly broke her, but Leah crouched down to his level, taking his hands in hers. "Dad and I need some space right now. But that doesn't change how much we both love you. You and Mia are the most important thing in the world to us, and that's never going to change." "But you're not going to be together anymore," Ben said, and it wasn't a question. Leah's throat tightened. "Probably not, sweetheart. I'm so sorry." He pulled away from her, his face closing off in that way children's faces did when they were trying not to cry, and ran into the house. Mia followed more slowly, looking back at her mother with worried eyes. "You're really doing this," Sarah said. "I am. Gavin's going to fight you. He'll use every resource he has to—" "Let him," Leah interrupted. "I'm not afraid of him anymore." It was true, she realized. The fear that had kept her compliant for so long had burned away, leaving something harder in its place. Gavin could threaten and manipulate and use his money and connections, but he couldn't make her invisible anymore. She'd already proven that. The kids came back with hastily packed bags, and Leah loaded them into the car, along with her own things. Sarah watched from the driveway, disapproval written clearly across her face. But Leah didn't care. She'd spent too long caring what Gavin's family thought, trying to be the perfect wife for their golden boy. She was done performing for anyone. Nina's house felt different with Ben and Mia there, filled with the noise and chaos of children who were trying to be brave but didn't quite understand what was happening. Nina had prepared the guest rooms, stocked the kitchen with their favorite foods, created a space where they could feel safe while their world fell apart. "Thank you," Leah said after the kids were in bed, she and Nina sitting in the living room with tea instead of wine because she needed to stay sharp. "For all of this. I don't know what I would have done without you." "You would have figured it out," Nina said confidently. "You're stronger than you think." "I don't feel strong. I feel terrified. Strength and fear aren't mutually exclusive." Nina set down her tea and turned to face her. "You're doing one of the hardest things a person can do. Ending a marriage, disrupting your children's lives, starting over from scratch. Of course you're terrified, but you're doing it anyway. That's what makes you strong." Leah's phone buzzed from where she'd finally turned it back on. Another message from Gavin. "You took my children without permission. That's parental kidnapping. Bring them home or I'm calling my lawyer." She showed the message to Nina, who snorted. "Empty threat. You're their mother and there's no custody agreement in place yet. He's just trying to scare you." "It's working," Leah admitted. "Then we document it. Screenshot everything he sends you, every threat and manipulation. It'll all help Rebecca build your case." More messages came through as the evening wore on. Some from Gavin, some from his family, even a few from mutual friends who'd apparently been drafted into his campaign to make Leah see reason. She read them all with a kind of detached fascination, seeing the patterns Rebecca had predicted playing out exactly as promised. Gavin painting her as unstable, his mother calling her selfish for putting her children through this, friends suggesting she was overreacting, that all marriages had rough patches, that she owed it to Ben and Mia to keep trying. No one asked what Gavin had done to drive her to this point. No one questioned his role in the marriage's collapse. It was all on her failure, her decision, her responsibility to fix what he'd broken. But Leah was done accepting responsibility for Gavin's choices. She turned off her phone again and went to check on the kids. Ben was lying awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly from the doorway. He shook his head. "Is it my fault that you and Dad are splitting up?" "Oh, sweetheart." Leah moved into the room and sat on the edge of his bed. "No, this is absolutely not your fault, or Mia's. This is about things between your father and me that have nothing to do with you." "But if we were better kids—" "You are the best kids," Leah interrupted firmly. "You and your sister are the best thing that ever happened to me. What's happening between your dad and me? That's about us not being good for each other anymore. About us needing to be apart so we can both be better people." Ben was quiet for a moment. "Dad says you're giving up on the family." The words hit like a physical blow, but Leah forced herself to stay calm. "What do you think?" He turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the dim light. "I think Dad says mean things to you sometimes. I've heard him. And you get really quiet and sad, and I don't like it." Leah's throat tightened. She thought she was hiding it, protecting them from the reality of a marriage that had curdled into something toxic. But children noticed everything, absorbed the tension and unhappiness even when they couldn't name it. "You're right," she said quietly. "Your dad and I haven't been kind to each other lately. And I don't want you and Mia growing up thinking that's what love looks like. Sometimes people who care about each other need to be apart." "Will we still see Dad?" "Of course, he's still your father and he loves you very much. That's never going to change." Ben nodded slowly, processing. "Okay. Okay? Yeah." He settled back against his pillow. "Can we still have pizza movie nights?" The mundane question in the middle of life-altering change made Leah smile despite everything. "Absolutely. Pizza movie nights are sacred." She kissed his forehead and went back downstairs, where Nina was still awake, scrolling through her phone with a frown. "What is it?" Leah asked. "Gavin's posting on social media." Nina turned her phone around, showing Leah a photo of Gavin with Ben and Mia from last summer, all of them smiling and perfect. The caption read, "Holding on to what matters most during difficult times. Family is everything." Leah stared at it, at the carefully constructed image of a devoted father, at the subtext that said she was the one tearing the family apart. "He's building his narrative," she said dully. "And making himself look like an ass in the process," Nina countered. "Anyone with half a brain can read between those lines. He's the one who brought his assistant to a formal event. He's the one who publicly humiliated his wife. A few Instagram posts aren't going to erase that. His family believes him. His family always believes him. They've spent 42 years making excuses for his behavior. But the people who matter, the lawyers, the court, the witnesses at that gala, they'll see the truth. Leah wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that truth mattered more than optics, that Gavin's carefully managed image would crack under scrutiny. But she'd spent 8 years watching him charm and manipulate and convince people of whatever reality he wanted them to see. She was exhausted from fighting, from standing her ground, from being brave when all she wanted was to curl up and let someone else handle the impossible task of rebuilding her life. But there was no one else, just her and Nina and Rebecca Chen with her legal expertise and ruthless efficiency. It would have to be enough. "I'm going to bed," Leah said, standing on legs that felt unsteady. "Tomorrow I need to start figuring out what comes next." "Tomorrow," Nina agreed. "Tonight you rest." But rest didn't come easily. Leah lay in Nina's guest room, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had changed in just a few days. A week ago, she'd been invisible, shrinking herself to fit Gavin's requirements, believing that she was the problem. Now she was the woman in the red dress who'd refused to disappear. The woman who'd stood up in front of everyone who mattered to Gavin's career and told the truth. The woman who'd filed for divorce and taken her children and started the long, terrifying process of building a life that was actually hers. She didn't know if she was strong enough for what came next. Didn't know if she could survive the custody battle and the financial negotiations and Gavin's inevitable attempts to destroy her credibility. But she knew she couldn't go back. And sometimes that knowledge was enough to keep moving forward. Morning came with Ben shaking her awake, his face inches from hers in the gray pre-dawn light. "Mom, Dad's here. He's downstairs talking to Aunt Nina, and he sounds really mad." Leah's heart kicked into overdrive, adrenaline flooding her system as she pushed herself upright. She could hear Gavin's voice carrying up the stairs, loud and aggressive, in a way that made her stomach clench with old, familiar fear. "Stay here with Mia," she told Ben, pulling on a robe. "I'll handle this." She descended the stairs to find Gavin in Nina's entryway, still in yesterday's clothes, his face haggard and furious. Nina stood between him and the rest of the house, arms crossed, looking like she was 2 seconds away from calling the police. "You can't keep my children from me," Gavin was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I have every right to see them." "At 6 in the morning?" Nina shot back. "By showing up uninvited and pounding on the door like you're trying to break it down." "That's not exercising your rights, Gavin. That's harassment." "Leah." He spotted her on the stairs and his expression shifted, cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Tell Nina that I'm allowed to see my own kids." "You are," Leah said, surprised at how steady her voice sounded. "But not like this. Not by showing up and making demands and scaring everyone." "Scaring everyone? I'm their father, and you're acting like an unhinged stranger." She came down the rest of the stairs but kept her distance, maintained the space that felt necessary now. "Ben and Mia are asleep. You can see them at a reasonable hour with reasonable notice, but I'm not waking them up because you decided you needed to make a point at dawn." Gavin's jaw worked, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "You took them without my permission. I'm their mother. I don't need your permission to take our children somewhere safe while we figure out what happens next." "Safe?" His laugh was bitter and sharp. "You're implying I'm dangerous? That our home isn't safe?" "Right now, yes." Leah held his gaze, refusing to back down despite every instinct screaming at her to placate, to smooth over, to make this easier for him. "You're angry and volatile and making threats. That's not safe for anyone. I have every right to be angry. You humiliated me in front of my entire firm, took my children, filed for divorce without even trying to work things out." "We tried working things out for 8 years, Leah interrupted, her voice rising now. "Every time I made myself smaller so you could be bigger. Every time I gave up something I wanted so you could have what you needed. Every time I swallowed your criticism and your contempt and told myself that's just how marriage worked. We tried, Gavin. I tried. And it was never going to be enough because you don't want a partner. You want someone you can control." "That's not true, isn't it?" She took a step closer, finding courage in her anger. "Tell me honestly, would we be here right now if I just accepted your decision to replace me at the gala? If I'd stayed home and stayed quiet and let you parade Chloe around like I didn't exist? Gavin's face flushed dark red. This isn't about Chloe. Then what is it about? Leah demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it's about you being furious that I didn't disappear when you told me to, that I showed up anyway and refused to let you rewrite our marriage as my failure instead of your cruelty. I was never cruel to you. You told me I was invisible, Leah said, her voice breaking slightly. You said I wasn't worth being seen with. You criticized every aspect of who I was while simultaneously making it impossible for me to be anything else. If that's not cruelty, what is it? Gavin opened his mouth, closed it, and for a moment she saw something like recognition flicker across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the defensive anger she knew so well. I gave you everything, he said, his voice low and dangerous. A beautiful home, financial security, a life most women dream of. And you threw it away because I gave you some honest feedback. Stop calling it feedback, Leah snapped. Stop pretending your contempt was constructive criticism. You spent years tearing me down, and I let you because I thought that's what love required. But I'm done. I'm done letting you define my worth. I'm done trying to earn approval from someone who was never going to give it. You're making a mistake, Gavin said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice now. If you would just come home, we could talk about this rationally. We are talking rationally. You just don't like what I'm saying. Leah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the robe. I'm filing for divorce, Gavin. Rebecca Chen is handling it. You'll be served with papers in the next few days, and we can work out custody and assets through our lawyers. But I'm not coming back. Not to the house, and definitely not to the marriage. He stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language, like he genuinely couldn't comprehend that she was choosing this, was choosing to leave him instead of fighting to make it work. The kids need their father, he said finally, and they'll have their father, just not in the same house as their mother. You're going to confuse them, damage them. What would damage them is watching their mother stay with someone who treats her like she's worthless, Leah said. I won't do that to Mia. I won't teach her that this is what she should accept from a partner. And I won't teach Ben that this is how you treat someone you love. Something in Gavin's expression crumpled just for a moment before he rebuilt the walls. So that's it? 8 years of marriage, 2 children, and you're just done? I'm not just anything, Leah said quietly. This is the hardest thing I've ever done, but yes, I'm done. They stood there in Nina's entryway, the space between them feeling like a chasm that had been growing for years and had finally become too wide to cross. Leah watched her husband cycle through emotions, anger, grief, disbelief, calculation, and felt nothing but a deep, bone-tired relief that this was almost over. You'll regret this, Gavin said finally, his voice cold. When you're struggling to make ends meet, when you're alone and the kids are asking why you broke up their family, you'll regret it. Maybe, Leah allowed, but I'll regret staying more. He left without another word, the door closing behind him with controlled precision that somehow felt more violent than slamming. Leah stood frozen until she heard his car start and pull away. Then her legs gave out, and she sank onto Nina's stairs, shaking. You were amazing, Nina said, sitting beside her and pulling her into a hug. Absolutely amazing. I feel like I'm going to throw up, Leah admitted. That's allowed. You just stood up to someone who spent years making you believe you couldn't. You're allowed to feel however you feel. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal documents and difficult conversations. Rebecca filed the divorce papers, and Gavin was served at his office in what Leah privately thought was poetic justice. His lawyer was exactly what she'd expected. Expensive, aggressive, and determined to paint Leah as an unstable wife who'd abandoned her family over minor marital disputes. But Rebecca was better. She had witness statements from the Gala, including a detailed account from Judith Caldwell about Gavin's behavior and Leah's composure. She had documentation of Gavin's controlling behavior around finances, his texts full of threats and manipulation, his social media posts designed to make himself look like the victim. He's playing right into our hands, Rebecca said during one of their many meetings. Every threatening message, every attempt to turn the kids against you, every post painting himself as the injured party, it all shows a pattern of manipulation and control. The court won't like it. Leah met with a therapist Nina recommended, someone who specialized in helping people recover from emotionally abusive relationships. At first, she'd resisted the label. Abuse felt like too strong a word for what she'd experienced, but as she talked through the years with Dr. Patricia Hughes, the patterns became impossible to ignore. The isolation from friends and her career, the constant criticism disguised as concern, the financial control, the gaslighting when she tried to express her feelings, the way Gavin had systematically dismantled her confidence until she'd believed she was the problem. Abuse doesn't always look like violence, Dr. Hughes explained gently. Sometimes it looks like someone slowly convincing you that you're worthless without them, that you're too difficult, too sensitive, too much, and not enough all at once. That's what Gavin did to you, Leah. And recognizing it doesn't make you weak, it makes you strong enough to walk away. The hardest part was the kids. Ben and Mia adjusted to the new normal with the resilience of children, but there were difficult moments. Mia cried for her old room. Ben asked repeatedly when they were going home, not understanding that Nina's house was home now, at least temporarily. And Gavin, true to his word, tried to use them as leverage. He filed for primary custody, claiming Leah was unstable and had kidnapped the children. He told Ben and Mia that Mommy had decided she didn't want to be a family anymore, that she'd chosen to leave. He bought them expensive presents and took them to fun places during his visitation, making his house seem like the place where happiness lived. But children were smarter than adults gave them credit for. They noticed which parent asked about their day and really listened, which parent helped with homework without making them feel stupid, which parents' love came with conditions and which parents didn't. Rebecca fought every motion Gavin filed, countered every accusation with documentation and witness statements. The legal battle was exhausting and expensive. Leah had to get a job to help cover her legal fees, started working at an interior design firm that was thrilled to have someone with her background and vision. It felt strange at first having her own money again, being valued for her skills rather than her usefulness to someone else. But slowly, incrementally, Leah started to remember who she'd been before she'd learned to make herself small. 3 months after she'd walked out of that gala, Leah signed a lease on a small but beautiful apartment in a good school district. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, older building, nothing like the house she'd shared with Gavin, but it was hers, truly, completely hers, purchased with money she'd earned and decorated according to her own taste. She let Ben and Mia pick out paint colors for their shared room, let them arrange furniture and hang posters and make it their space. And when they asked if Daddy could visit, she said yes, because this wasn't about punishing Gavin. It was about building something better. The divorce proceedings dragged on, with Gavin fighting every point and Rebecca matching him blow for blow. Asset division was complicated by the fact that Gavin had hidden money in accounts Leah hadn't known about, had made investments in his name only despite the fact that they'd been married when he'd made them. He's trying to protect his wealth, Rebecca explained. But marriage is a partnership, at least legally. You're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, and I'm going to make sure you get it. The custody evaluation was brutal. A court-appointed psychologist interviewed both parents, observed them with the children, spoke to teachers and neighbors, and anyone who might have insight into the family dynamics. Leah tried to be honest without being cruel, to explain what had happened without painting Gavin as a monster. Because he wasn't a monster. He was just a man who'd valued control more than connection, who'd loved the idea of a family more than the actual people in it, who'd never learned that love wasn't the same as possession. The psychologist's report was devastating for Gavin. It noted his attempts to alienate the children from their mother, his manipulative behavior, his focus on material possessions over emotional connection. It recommended joint custody but suggested Leah should be the primary parent, with Gavin having regular visitation. When Rebecca showed her the report, Leah felt no triumph, just a deep sadness for what could have been if Gavin had been capable of seeing her as a person instead of a reflection of his success. 6 months after the gala, they finally reached a settlement. Leah got the apartment and a fair division of assets, enough that she could support herself and the kids without struggling. Gavin got to keep the house and his retirement accounts, his pride and his image of himself as the injured party. They'd share custody, with the kids spending weekdays with Leah and weekends with Gavin, holidays alternating. It wasn't perfect, but it was workable. The day the divorce was finalized, Leah stood in the courthouse hallway with Rebecca and felt the weight of 8 years lifting off her shoulders. She wasn't Mrs. Gavin Cross anymore. She was just Leah, mother, designer, survivor of something she was only beginning to understand. "How do you feel?" Rebecca asked. "Free," Leah said, and meant it. Gavin appeared at the other end of the hallway with his lawyer, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw something in his expression, regret, maybe, or loss, or just the realization that he'd destroyed something he couldn't rebuild. She felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, but mostly she felt nothing. He was her past now, not her present, and definitely not her future. She turned away and walked out into the afternoon sunshine, where Nina was waiting with champagne and a smile that said she was proud and relieved in equal measure. "It's done?" Nina asked. "It's done." They drove to the apartment, where Ben and Mia were waiting with the babysitter, and Leah told them that yes, the divorce was final, but no, nothing was going to change for them. They'd still see both parents, still be loved by both parents, still be the most important thing in the world. "So you and Dad are really not getting back together?" Mia asked, her 8-year-old face serious. "No, sweetheart, we're not." "Good," Ben said, surprising her. "You're happier now. You smile more." Out of the mouths of children, Leah thought, and pulled them both into a hug that felt like a promise. She would keep smiling, keep building this new life, keep showing them what it looked like to choose yourself without apology. The months that followed were far from easy. There were nights when Leah lay awake worrying about money, about whether she was damaging her kids, about whether she'd made the right choice. There were moments when Gavin was difficult about schedules or used the kids to send messages he was too proud to deliver himself. But there were also moments of pure joy, watching Ben score a goal at soccer and seeing him look to the stands where she was cheering, not worrying about whether his father would approve. Helping Mia with an art project and seeing her daughter's creativity bloom without anyone telling her she was doing it wrong. Taking on design clients and feeling that spark of passion she'd thought was lost forever. Judith Caldwell became an unlikely friend, hiring Leah to redesign her Cotswolds cottage and introducing her to other partners' wives who needed her services. The work was fulfilling in a way Leah had forgotten work could be, using her skills and vision to transform spaces and make people happy. She dated occasionally, though nothing serious. She wasn't ready for that yet, was still learning how to be a whole person instead of half of a dysfunctional partnership, but it felt good to be wanted, to have conversations with men who asked about her day and listened to the answer, who treated her like she had value beyond what she could do for them. A year after the divorce was finalized, Leah's design business had grown enough that she hired an assistant and started turning down projects she didn't love. She'd moved to a bigger apartment with separate rooms for Ben and Mia, had saved enough for a comfortable emergency fund, had built a life that was smaller than the one she'd had with Gavin, but infinitely richer. She ran into him occasionally. Manchester wasn't that big, and they shared custody of 2 children. Sometimes he was with Chloe, who'd apparently become more than just his assistant. Sometimes he was alone, looking successful and polished, and somehow smaller than he'd seemed when she'd believed his version of reality. He tried talking to her once, catching her at drop-off when the kids were already inside. "You look good," he said, and there was something wistful in his voice. "Happy." "I am," Leah said simply. "I've been thinking about what you said, about control, and how I treated you." He looked uncomfortable, like the words cost him something. "Maybe you weren't entirely wrong." It was the closest thing to an apology she was likely to get from Gavin Cross, and Leah recognized it for the olive branch it was. But she didn't need his validation anymore, didn't need him to acknowledge what he'd done for her to know it had been real. "I hope you figure it out," she said, not unkindly, "for your sake, and for whoever comes next. Do you ever think about—" He stopped, started again. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd tried harder? If things had been different?" Leah looked at him, at this man she'd loved and feared and ultimately outgrown, and felt nothing but a gentle sadness for the years they'd wasted trying to force something that was never going to work. "No," she said honestly, "I don't wonder that at all." She walked away from him for what felt like the final time, leaving behind the weight of who she'd been when they were together and embracing who she'd become in the aftermath. 2 years after the gala, Leah stood in a gallery where several of her design projects were being featured as part of a showcase on Manchester's emerging talents. Ben and Mia were there, excited and proud, pointing out the photos of rooms their mother had created. Nina was there, champagne in hand, looking smug about being right all along. Dr. Hughes was there, and Rebecca, and Judith, with several other women who'd become friends and clients, and proof that Leah's network extended far beyond what Gavin had allowed. Someone asked her to tell the story of how she'd gotten back into design, and Leah found herself talking about the divorce, about rediscovering her passion after years of neglecting it, about learning that it was never too late to reclaim yourself. "It sounds like you're grateful for what happened," the interviewer said. "Like the end of your marriage was actually a gift." Leah considered that, thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, invisible, diminished, convinced that she was the problem. Thought about the woman she was now, confident, creative, whole. "I'm not grateful for the pain," she said carefully, "or for the years I lost believing I wasn't enough. But I am grateful for what I learned, that I'm stronger than I thought, that I deserve to take up space, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from something that's destroying you." The interviewer nodded, satisfied with the quote, and moved on to technical questions about color theory and spatial design. But Leah's mind stayed on that moment, on the realization that she'd not only survived the ending of her marriage, but had built something beautiful from the wreckage. Later, after the gallery had closed and the champagne was gone and the kids were home with the babysitter, Leah stood alone in her apartment and looked at the life she'd created. It was smaller than what she'd had with Gavin, but it was hers. Every choice, every piece of furniture, every moment of happiness earned through her own strength rather than borrowed from someone else's approval. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nina. "Proud of you doesn't even begin to cover it." Leah smiled and typed back, "Proud of me too." Because that was the real victory, wasn't it? Not just leaving Gavin, not just surviving the divorce, not just rebuilding her career and her confidence, but learning to be proud of herself without needing anyone else's permission. She thought about the woman she'd been at that gala 2 years ago, walking into a ballroom in a red dress and refusing to be invisible. That woman had been terrified and furious and barely holding herself together, but she'd shown up anyway. She'd claimed space that wasn't being offered and spoken truths that needed saying. That woman had saved her life. Leah Cross, no longer married, no longer invisible, no longer trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it, poured herself a glass of wine and raised it to her reflection in the window. "To freedom," she said to the woman looking back, the one who'd fought so hard to be seen and heard and valued, to choosing yourself, to knowing you're worth it. The reflection smiled back, confident and whole, and Leah knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next, challenges or opportunities, heartbreak or joy, she would face it as herself. Complete, undiminished, enough exactly as she was. The journey from invisible to seen had been painful and terrifying and necessary. And standing here now, on the other side of everything she'd survived, Leah understood that sometimes you had to break completely before you could rebuild yourself stronger. She'd broken. She'd rebuilt. And she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Finally, blessedly, home in her own skin.